When the police finally opened room 6 of the Sundown Motel, it appeared to have been empty for 20 years. Dust covered the furniture. The bed had been stripped bare, and a faded painting hung crooked above the headboard. There were no footprints, no fingerprints, and no sign that anyone had entered recently. Then a woman whispered from behind the wall, "Please, don't leave us here." 3 weeks earlier, 24-year-old Nora Hale was driving through Blackpine County on her way home. She had spent the weekend photographing an old railway station for a magazine and had stayed longer than planned. By the time she reached the mountain highway, the sun had disappeared behind the pines. Her mother had warned her never to use that road after dark. 7 young women had vanished in Blackpine County during the previous 4 years. All of them had been traveling alone. Their cars were eventually discovered near different exits, neatly parked with their doors locked. Handbags, luggage, and money were left inside. Investigators found no blood, fingerprints, or signs of a struggle. The newspapers called them the Highway Girls. At 11:17, Nora's right front tire suddenly burst near exit 14. Her car swerved across the empty lane before sliding onto the shoulder beneath a broken streetlight. Nora checked her phone. No signal. The nearest building was an abandoned gas station surrounded by dark trees. Its windows had been boarded up, and the old sign turned slowly in the wind. Nora remained inside the car, locked the doors, and waited for another vehicle. 20 minutes later, amber lights appeared in her mirror. A gray tow truck stopped behind her. The driver was a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair and a clean blue uniform. His name tag read Dean. A woman sat in the passenger seat. Dean explained that a passing driver had reported Nora's car. His sister Evelyn had joined him because she hated the thought of a young woman waiting alone at night. That detail made Nora feel safer. Evelyn was soft-spoken and carefully dressed, with pale hair tied behind her head. She wrapped a blanket around Nora's shoulders and promised they would take her to a repair shop that stayed open all night. Dean loaded the damaged car onto the truck without saying much. As they drove, Nora noticed that the highway lights were becoming less frequent. The truck turned away from the main road and entered a narrow lane between the trees. Dean said a fallen tree had blocked the usual route. Evelyn handed Nora a bottle of water and assured her they would arrive in 15 minutes. Nora never remembered finishing the water. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on a narrow bed in a windowless room. Her coat, shoes, and phone were gone. A steel door stood at the opposite end of the room, but there was no handle on her side. 2 frightened women watched her from the floor. One introduced herself as Maya Torres. She had disappeared 11 days earlier while driving home from a late shift at a hospital. The other was Claire Lawson, a graduate student who had been missing for almost 2 months. They told Nora they were inside the Sundown Motel, an old roadside building that had supposedly burned and been demolished more than 20 years ago. Dean and Evelyn had inherited the property from their parents. The visible rooms were abandoned, but hidden passages connected the walls behind them. Dean could enter any room without opening its main door. Evelyn came every morning with food, clean clothing, and questions. She wanted to know about their families, childhoods, routines, and the people who might search for them. Dean rarely spoke. At night, the women heard him walking through the narrow passages, stopping behind each wall to listen. Maya and Claire had learned one important rule. Whenever Evelyn said that a woman was ready to go home, that woman disappeared before sunrise. Nobody ever returned. During Nora's first night, a faint tapping came from the room beside theirs. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Maya tapped the same pattern against the wall. A woman answered. Claire said her name was Rachel, but they had never seen her face. The walls allowed sound to travel in strange directions, and Dean sometimes used the hidden speaker to imitate voices. The prisoners could never be certain whether they were speaking to another woman or to him. Shortly before dawn, footsteps stopped behind the glass. A small red light appeared in the darkness. Someone was recording them while they slept. Nora turned her back to the glass and quietly promised Maya and Claire that she would find a way out. She did not know whether she believed it, but saying the words changed the room. For the first time, the three women began thinking like a team instead of three separate victims. Nora examined the room. The ceiling was too high to reach. The floor was solid concrete. A dark mirror covered part of one wall. She stepped closer and realized it was not a mirror. It was glass. Someone was standing in the darkness on the other side. Nora could not see a face, but she could hear slow breathing. Then Dean's voice came through a hidden speaker. "Welcome to the Sundown Motel." Nora refused to let him see her fear. For the next 2 days, she studied everything: footsteps behind the walls, the times the lights dimmed, and the sound of water moving through old pipes. She measured the room by counting her steps. She memorized the order in which Evelyn opened the doors. She listened for anything that could reveal where the motel was hidden. Every night at 2:10, a freight train sounded its horn somewhere nearby. 7 minutes later, the electricity flickered as the train passed an old crossing. At noon, Nora heard distant church bells. When the wind came from the east, she could smell wet pine and smoke from a lumber mill. Maya believed they were close to the Northern Railway. Claire remembered seeing a white church beside the road before she lost consciousness. Together, those details could identify the motel, if they could contact someone outside. On Nora's third morning, Evelyn entered carrying a video camera. She also brought a scrapbook. Inside were newspaper articles about every missing woman, arranged carefully beneath handwritten notes. Evelyn had recorded which families cried during television interviews, which friends organized searches, and which cases disappeared from the news after only a few days. Besides several photographs, she had written the same sentence: nobody truly knew her. Evelyn spoke about the women as if she understood them better than their own families. She remembered birthdays, favorite songs, and private messages they had posted years earlier. Her knowledge did not feel like affection. It felt like ownership. She ordered Nora to record a message for her mother. Nora was supposed to say that she had left voluntarily and did not want anyone to search for her. When Nora refused, Evelyn's warm expression disappeared. She explained that Dean believed lonely women were safer inside the motel than in the outside world. According to Evelyn, their families had failed to protect them. Here, nobody could abandon them, hurt them, or forget them. Nora understood that Evelyn did not think of herself as a kidnapper. She believed the motel gave her the right to decide which women deserved a different life. Dean stood silently behind her, waiting for instructions. That was when Nora noticed the truth. Dean might have driven the truck and carried the women inside, but Evelyn chose them. She studied their lives online, learned their routes, and selected moments when nobody would immediately notice they were missing. The newspapers imagined a man hunting strangers along the highway. In reality, the woman beside him had planned everything. Nora finally agreed to record the message. She stared slightly past the camera and told her mother not to worry. Then she mentioned a childhood dog named Sundown. Nora's family had never owned a dog. She hoped her mother would recognize the word as a clue. That afternoon, Evelyn told Claire she would soon be ready to go home. Claire stopped speaking. Maya held her hand, while Nora searched the room with growing desperation. Behind a loose strip of wallpaper, Claire had found a small screw. For weeks she had been using its edge against the air vent whenever the footsteps moved away. That night, the final corner of the vent came free. Behind it was a narrow maintenance tunnel. Nora crawled inside while Maya and Claire replaced the cover. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Dust filled her lungs, and old electrical wires brushed against her face. She moved forward slowly, terrified that Dean might be waiting around the next turn. Through small openings, she could see other motel rooms. Some contained empty beds. Others contained boxes marked with women's names. In one room, a red coat hung from a hook. Maya recognized it from a photograph of one of the missing highway girls. Farther along, Nora found a row of tiny viewing holes. Dean had been watching every room from inside the walls. At the end of the passage, she discovered an opening above the motel office. Below her were shelves filled with handbags, identification cards, jewelry, cameras, and phones. Photographs covered an entire wall. Each missing woman had been photographed beside her car before she was taken. Red circles marked those who had disappeared. Blue circles surrounded women Dean and Evelyn were still watching. An open notebook described each abduction in Evelyn's precise handwriting. She had listed weather conditions, traffic levels, police response times, and the exact minute each family reported someone missing. Beside Dean's name were instructions rather than decisions. Drive. Wait. Bring her inside. Clean the car. Nora also found a police scanner and a collection of recorded emergency calls. Evelyn had listened to every search from the safety of the motel. When officers moved close to exit 14, she sent Dean along a different road in the tow truck so witnesses would remember seeing him somewhere else. Nora counted more than 30 blue circles. Then she found her own photograph. It had been taken outside her apartment 6 weeks earlier. Her tire had not failed by accident. Dean and Evelyn had followed her, learned her schedule, and waited for the night she would be alone. An old telephone sat on the office desk. Nora lowered herself from the passage and lifted the receiver. There was a dial tone. She called emergency services and whispered the motel's name. She mentioned exit 14, the freight train, the church bells, and the lumber mill. The operator asked her to remain on the line. Before Nora could answer, the office lights turned on. Dean stood in the doorway. He did not shout or run toward her. He simply reached behind him and disconnected the telephone cable. Evelyn's voice came from the hallway. Dean, bring her to room 6. For the first time since waking in the motel, Nora saw fear in Dean's eyes. He leaned closer and whispered 2 words. I'm sorry. Then, from somewhere behind the office wall, several women began screaming. Dean reached for Nora, but she grabbed the heavy telephone and threw it through the office window. Glass shattered into the rain. Before he could stop her, she climbed through the broken frame and ran across the motel courtyard. The building formed a horseshoe around an empty swimming pool filled with black water. Several doors had been covered with plywood. The broken motel sign flashed once, illuminating the word Sundown Vacancy, before darkness returned. Nora had expected to see the highway beyond the property. Instead, she saw only trees. The original entrance had been buried beneath dirt and fallen branches. Dean and Evelyn used an unmarked service road hidden behind the motel. From the highway, the property was completely invisible. Nora ran toward the gray tow truck, but the doors were locked. Evelyn appeared beneath the motel sign holding Nora's phone. She calmly explained that the emergency operator would never find them. The Sundown Motel had been removed from county maps after a fire 23 years earlier. Officially, the building no longer existed. Dean stepped into the courtyard, but he did not approach Nora. He stared at the broken office window, as though nobody had ever disobeyed Evelyn before. Nora used his hesitation. She told him Evelyn would eventually blame him for everything. Dean had driven the truck. His face had appeared on traffic cameras. His fingerprints were inside every missing car. Evelyn had carefully made sure there was almost no evidence connecting her to the victims. Dean looked toward his sister. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then the motel lights went out. Maya and Claire had reached the maintenance tunnel and torn the electrical controls from the wall. In the darkness, locks released indoors began opening throughout the motel. Women emerged from rooms Dean and Evelyn had never mentioned. Some had been imprisoned for days. Others had been there for months. They moved into the courtyard silently, shielding their eyes from the rain. Nora counted 8 of them. Evelyn screamed at Dean to stop them, but he remained frozen. Without the lights, cameras, and locked doors, the world she had constructed was collapsing. Nora remembered the freight train. It was almost 2:10. She climbed into the tow truck through a side window that had been left partly open. The keys were gone, but the horn still worked. As the distant train approached, Nora pressed the horn in a repeated pattern: 3 short blasts, 3 long blasts, and 3 short blasts. SOS. The train answered with one long, thunderous horn. Evelyn pulled Nora away from the truck. During the struggle, Nora's phone fell onto the wet ground. The emergency call had ended, but the screen was still recording. Evelyn's voice was captured clearly as she ordered Dean to lock every woman back inside. Dean finally understood. His sister had never intended for the police to blame both of them. He removed the motel keys from his pocket and threw them into the courtyard. The women scattered, opening every door they could find. Dean sat beside the empty swimming pool and covered his face. Evelyn disappeared into the service passage behind room 6. 26 minutes later, police vehicles reached the motel. Until the lights appeared through the trees, the women remained together in the courtyard. Rain soaked their borrowed clothing. Nobody knew whether Evelyn was still inside the walls. Every movement in the dark passageways sounded like someone returning. One of the rescued women, Rachel, had been locked alone for 94 days. Another had been taken only the previous evening and still believed she was inside a hospital. Claire stood near room 6, calling into the opening, but no one answered. The screams Nora had heard behind the office had stopped. The emergency operator had heard the freight train during Nora's call. Investigators compared the horn to railway schedules and located the only abandoned property near the 210 crossing. Dean Mercer surrendered without resistance. Inside the office, police recovered evidence connected to all 7 highway girls. They also found maps, photographs, and lists of future victims. Behind the walls were observation passages, locked rooms, and hundreds of recorded conversations. But Evelyn was gone. Search teams discovered a tunnel beneath room 6 that continued into the forest. They followed it for nearly a mile before losing the trail beside a fast-moving river. Dean later confessed to helping abduct the women, but he refused to explain what had happened to the 7 victims who disappeared before Nora arrived. Whenever detectives asked, he repeated the same sentence. Detectives learned that Dean and Evelyn's mother had managed the motel before the fire. She taught her children to move through the maintenance passages and listen to guests without being noticed. After the building closed, Evelyn spent years restoring the hidden rooms while Dean operated the tow truck. The disappearances began soon after their mother died. Evelyn decided when they were ready to go home. 6 months later, the Sundown Motel was demolished. Nora tried to rebuild her life. She moved to another city, changed her phone number, and never drove alone after dark. Maya returned to the hospital. Claire completed her degree. The 3 women spoke every week, but none of them could sleep in a room with an air vent near the bed. On the anniversary of Nora's escape, a postcard arrived without a stamp or return address. On the front was a photograph of Nora entering her new apartment. On the back, someone had written 5 words. You left without checking out. Police searched Nora's building. They found no intruder, no fingerprints, and no sign of Evelyn. But behind Nora's bedroom wall, they discovered a narrow empty space. Someone had recently been inside it. On the floor lay a clean blue uniform with a name tag that read Dean. and beneath the uniform was a new photograph of Nora, sleeping in her bed.